Greetings, dear friends. Your support is our strength. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. This helps the growth of our channel. Write comments because feedback is very valuable to us. And now to the most current world news. Let's go! The European Union is ready to respond to the US with sanctions. Leader Frau von der Leyen announced negotiations with Trump from a position of strength only. Japan is preparing for a disaster. An earthquake with a magnitude of 9 and 30-meter tsunamis could claim about 300,000 Japanese lives. Russia has provided the US with evidence of Ukraine's ceasefire violations, Lavrov stated. Iran is preparing a preemptive strike under the American base on Chagos, reports the Telegraph. Russian troops are advancing on Kondrashovka under the threat of Kupyansk supply. China has begun large-scale military exercises around Taiwan. Hello friends, this is Channel 8 again with your host Sergei Ruski. Let's talk about the main issues. The European Union is ready to respond to the US with sanctions. Leader Frau von der Leyen announced negotiations with Trump from a position of strength. The head of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, in a very sharp statement, warned the US of the European Union's readiness for a tough dialogue in the event of an escalation of trade disputes. According to her, the European Union has enough capability to speak with Donald Trump from a position of strength, including even retaliatory sanctions. The reason for such harsh rhetoric was the recent statements by the former US president, who promised to impose new tariffs on European goods if he returns to the White House. Von der Leyen emphasized that Brussels will not allow unilateral measures and is ready to have the full arsenal of trade tools, including restrictions against American companies. We have proven that we can act decisively, stated the head of the European Commission, and our internal market gives us economic weight, while a unified stance provides political leverage. Experts note that the threat of sanctions is not just rhetoric. The European Union has already imposed retaliatory tariffs during Trump's presidency, I remind you, in the years 2018-2020. And now, with the strengthening of this monopoly regulation and the green course, the bourgeoisie has new levers of pressure. The question remains open whether this will be the start of a new trade war or just an attempt by the EU to force Washington to come to the negotiating table. Japan is preparing for a disaster. An earthquake with a magnitude of 9 and a 30-meter tsunami will claim the lives of about 300,000 Japanese residents. Japanese authorities are urgently enhancing preparations for what could potentially be the most destructive natural disaster in the country's history. According to seismologists' forecasts, there is an 80% probability that in the coming years, an earthquake with a magnitude of 8-9 will occur in the Nankai Trough Zone, followed by a tsunami with waves over 30 meters high. The government estimates that the number of casualties could reach around 300,000 people, and the economic damage could be nearly $2 trillion. The Great Nankai Threat, which has been anticipated for decades. The danger of this scenario, known as the Great Nankai Trough Earthquake, was predicted by scientists as early as 2012-2013. However, now the seismic activity in the region has reached its critical level. According to Reuters, underground tremors of such magnitude have caused not only immediate destruction but also a series of secondary disasters. A 30-meter tsunami that will flood all nearby cities within minutes, massive fires due to damage to gas pipelines. But also do not forget about the nuclear threat in the risk zone of the nuclear power plant, including stations similar to Fukushima. Evacuation of about 1 million people. Unprecedented measures. The Japanese government has already begun developing emergency plans for a comprehensive global evacuation. More than 1 million people are at risk. This is about 1% of the entire country's population. Authorities are strengthening the early warning system, checking shelters and conducting drills. However, even with perfect preparation, avoiding colossal casualties will be extremely difficult. Meanwhile, Japan faces a massive economic blow with losses in the trillions. The consequences of the disaster could paralyze the economy for a long time. The old ladies of Japan. Destruction of infrastructure, roads, ports, power grids, halting of production, including auto giants. And don't forget about Japanese electronics. Global supply chains are under global threat. The crisis will hit worldwide. Is it possible to avoid this disaster? Japan, as you know, is a world leader in earthquake-resistant construction and early warning systems. But even the most advanced technologies do not guarantee protection from an impact of such magnitude. Scientists are calling on the entire international community to cooperate, because the next big Nankai will become not only a Japanese but also a global humanitarian catastrophe. Russia has provided the US with evidence of Ukraine's ceasefire violations, stated Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. Sergei Lavrov stated that Moscow provided the American side with a list of all the targets that Ukraine had struck during the 30-day period declared as a ceasefire, that is, a truce. This document was handed over to the US Secretary of State, the Assistant to President Donald Trump for National Security Affairs, and the representatives of the Russian Federation at the UN. And the list of violations? The question is, to whom and for what purpose? According to Lavrov, Russia continues to adhere to the agreements despite systematic violations by the non-negotiable Kyiv and the expired president of that country. 404. The list handed over to Washington includes military and civilian targets that were shelled in the USSR. The document was sent to the US Secretary of State, key advisors to Trump, and diplomats at the United Nations. The purpose of this action is to draw the international community's attention to Ukraine's criminal actions. The Kremlin insists that Kyiv is using the ceasefire to regroup its forces. The reaction and consequences of this? So far, the US has not officially commented on the received data. However, if Washington acknowledges the violations, it could firstly increase pressure on Ukraine from its Western partners. Secondly, give Moscow a reason to withdraw from this ceasefire. And thirdly, intensify the discussion at the UN about the real objectives of the parties involved in the conflict. Iran is preparing a preemptive strike on the American base in Chagos, reports the Telegraph agency. Iran is considering the possibility of launching a preemptive strike on a strategic US military base on the Chagos archipelago, where B-2 Spirit stealth bombers are stationed. According to the Telegraph, citing its informed sources, Tehran fears that Donald Trump might use this base to attack Iranian nuclear facilities after his return to the White House. Diego Garcia Base. Why is it at risk? The Chagos archipelago, including Diego Garcia Atoll, has served as a key military hub for the US in the Indian Ocean for decades. Stealth bombers B-2 capable of carrying nuclear weapons are stationed here. There are also reconnaissance drones and special forces units here. Critical infrastructure for operations throughout the Middle East. According to informed sources, Iranian military believes that a preemptive strike could disrupt potential plans of the United States, especially if Trump decides to act tough. After his election victory, how might this conflict develop? Experts highlight three possible scenarios. First, Iranian missile strike. Tehran might deploy medium-range ballistic missiles. For example, Farran, Sher, with a range of up to 2,000 kilo. Or a cyber attack, disabling base systems before any military confrontation. The US response is, if the strike attempt is detected in advance, Washington may launch a retaliatory strike on Iranian targets. The reaction of the international community, the United Kingdom, the formal sovereign of Chagos, has already expressed deep concern. The UN previously recognized the archipelago as part of Mauritius, but the United States of America ignores this decision. China and Russia might use the situation to exert pressure on Washington in the UN Security Council. What's next? And next, if Iran indeed delivers such a strike, it will become the first direct military confrontation between Tehran and Washington in recent years. And the consequences could be catastrophic. From a sharp rise in oil prices to a full-scale war in the Persian Gulf. Now, news from the front. Russian troops are advancing on Kondrashovka, threatening the supply lines of Kupyansk. The Russian army is intensifying its pressure in the area of the village of Kondrashovka, creating a direct threat of operational encirclement of the city of Kupyansk. According to a Ukrainian officer with the call sign Alex, intense fighting has been ongoing for several days, with Russian units employing the tactic of small group assaults. The breakthrough tactic against enemy drones. According to frontline reports, assault groups of the armed forces of the Russian Federation are advancing through difficult terrain, utilizing ravines and gullies in the process. This tactic complicates the operation of Ukrainian drones and makes the use of heavy equipment less effective. Meanwhile, Russian troops are concentrating forces in the northern part of the village for their further advance. The strategic significance of Kondrashovka control over this settlement is critically important for both sides. Firstly, because a key road passes through the village, connecting the northern territories with Kupyansk. Secondly, the loss of Kondrashovka would pose a threat to the logistics corridor of the Ukrainian armed forces. Thirdly, Russian troops will gain
a direct foothold for further advancement on the city. And the reaction of the Ukrainian command at the Armed Forces headquarters confirms this information. The situation remains tense, but supposedly under control. Meanwhile, Ukrainian units continue to strengthen their defensive positions. Work is being done to counter Russian small assault group tactics. They have been waiting. China has begun large-scale military exercises around Taiwan. The People's Liberation Army of China has launched the largest military maneuvers in recent months in the Taiwan Strait area. According to the Ministry of Defense of the PRC, the exercises involve ground forces, naval forces, aviation, and missile units. The scenario of the exercises is as follows. The Operation Commander General Xi stated that the maneuvers are practicing firstly, patrolling adjacent waters, secondly, seizing control of key areas, and thirdly, delivering combined strikes. Fourthly, the blockade of the island. The goal of this operation is to approach Taiwan from multiple directions, General emphasized. International reaction to this event. Taiwan has put its troops on high alert. Air defense systems have been activated. Patrolling of Taiwan's airspace has been intensified. The Navy has been put on combat readiness. The United States, meanwhile, condemned China's actions, calling them destabilizing. This region. Expert assessment. Military analysts note that the exercises replicate the scenario of a possible blockade of the Yachi Island. The Chinese People's Republic demonstrates the ability to rapidly deploy its military forces. The intensity of the maneuvers exceeds last year's figures.